It was a bright, peaceful Monday morning in suburban Crestwood Hills, the kind of neighborhood where birds chirped with obnoxious perfection and kids rode scooters before school, while parents waved to each other with half-fake smiles. Ethan Cole adjusted the collar of his shirt while pouring Lily's favorite cereal, chocolate puffs with almond milk, a non-negotiable tradition in their morning routine. His wife, Grace, hummed softly in the kitchen as she packed Lily's lunchbox with carrot sticks, a turkey sandwich, and the small note she always included, "You're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem." Ethan glanced at the wall clock. "All right, champ," he called to Lily, who came hopping down the stairs with a bright purple backpack almost bigger than her. "Let's roll before traffic makes us late." 7-year-old Lily grinned, the gap in her front teeth making her look even more angelic. "Race you to the sidewalk," she yelled as the front door opened, sunlight spilling into their tidy hallway. Ethan followed with her scooter in one hand and his car keys in the other. As they stepped outside, the idyllic piece of the neighborhood seemed almost too perfect, the kind that made your skin crawl when you stopped to think about it. Their house stood directly across from a small HOA-managed park, where parents often gathered for events, unless Karen Benson was around. Known as the iron-willed enforcer of the HOA rules, Margaret Karen Benson was a woman with a sharp tongue, a tighter bun, and an even tighter leash on her belief that the neighborhood was hers to rule. She had complained about Lily before, first for drawing chalk art on the sidewalk, then for walking too loudly past her rose bushes, and most recently for having a small therapy puppy that yapped too much. As Ethan and Lily walked toward the crosswalk just past the main intersection, they heard the unmistakable screech of tires. Karen's red SUV, the same one she'd used to threaten teenagers for skateboarding, was parked crookedly near her driveway. She stood outside, arms crossed, glaring at them. "Control your kid, Ethan," she snapped, not even disguising her contempt. "This is a community, not a daycare center." Ethan calmly waved her off. "Good morning to you too, Karen," he said, guiding Lily along. Karen's eyes narrowed at them like a hawk spotting prey. "You're always late, and she always runs. One day, she's going to get what's coming to her." Grace had begged Ethan to report her weeks ago, but he had always said she's all bark, no bite. If only he'd known how tragically wrong he was. As Lily reached the white-painted crosswalk just across Maple Drive, her little feet tapped excitedly. She pressed the pedestrian button. The light changed. She looked both ways, just like she was taught. Ethan stepped up beside her, waiting for the walk signal to blink green. And then, suddenly screaming tires. Ethan turned his head just in time to see Karen's SUV barreling down the street, swerving sharply toward the crosswalk. "Lily back?" Ethan shouted, but the sound of a gunshot ripped through the air like a crack of thunder. A single echo, a scream. The force knocked Lily's small body to the ground as blood splattered across the asphalt. Time seemed to shatter. Ethan fell to his knees. "Lily." His voice cracked into raw panic as he scrambled to her, heart hammering against his ribs like a battering ram. Her tiny frame lay twisted, one hand stretched out toward the scooter still standing upright beside her. The pink helmet she wore had a clean bullet hole, a red bloom soaked through her school uniform. The world collapsed around Ethan as bystanders screamed. Karen's SUV screeched away, tires burning rubber, her license plate disappearing around the corner. She didn't stop. She didn't even hesitate. Neighbors came running. Someone called 911. A mother shrieked while shielding her own child's eyes. Ethan couldn't breathe. His hands trembled as he cradled Lily's head. "Stay with me. Baby, stay with Daddy. You're okay. You're okay. Please." Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes fluttered closed. Blood was pooling faster. "Where are they? Where are the ambulances?" He screamed into the sky. Grace, who had stayed back to grab a jacket, heard the gunshot and came running barefoot down the street, her face pale with disbelief. She collapsed beside them, wailing, rocking her daughter's fragile body as if her warmth could will life back into her. Paramedics arrived in under 4 minutes, but to Ethan, it felt like a lifetime. Single gunshot wound to the chest, one EMT barked, applying pressure while another began CPR. Pulse is fading. We're losing her. Ethan stood paralyzed, unable to stop shaking. Grace sobbed uncontrollably, her white shirt now stained with Lily's blood. The medics moved quickly, oxygen for Lyne's stretcher. We need to go now. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the sirens screamed through the neighborhood, leaving Ethan and Grace behind in a blur of grief, rage, and disbelief. Someone wrapped a blanket around Grace's shoulders. A neighbor muttered something about that Karen woman, but no one could say for certain why she had done it, or if she had snapped entirely. Ethan's fists clenched. His child had done nothing wrong. She had been crossing the road. A child, 7 years old, shot on a Monday morning, in front of her father, in front of her home, and Karen fled like a coward. The neighborhood that once felt safe now pulsed with whispers and fear. The police arrived. Statements were taken. Descriptions matched, but Karen was gone. Her house was dark, curtains pulled, car missing. As night fell, Ethan stood in Lily's room, the purple unicorn sheets untouched, her backpack slung on the chair, untouched homework on her desk. He held her favorite stuffed bear and whispered to it as if it could tell her to come back. Grace sat on the floor with red eyes, rocking back and forth, refusing to leave the room. That night, the hospital called. She's in critical condition. The bullet missed her heart by inches. She's stable for now, but the next 48 hours will be crucial. Ethan dropped his knees. Relief, guilt, and fury battled inside him. He had almost lost his daughter, and the woman responsible had vanished. But Ethan made a vow that night, kneeling beside Lily's hospital bed, gripping her tiny fingers as machines beeped around her. He whispered through clenched teeth, "Karen Benson, you will never know peace again. You shot the wrong girl, and you messed with the wrong father." The nightmare had just begun. The ICU smelled like alcohol wipes, old plastic, and something colder, something cruel that clung to the sterile walls like grief that wouldn't let go. Machines beeped steadily beside Lily's bed as a respirator clicked rhythmically, keeping her alive. Ethan Cole hadn't left her side all night. He sat there, unshaven, still wearing the same blood-stained shirt, holding his daughter's tiny hand like it was the last string tying his soul together. Grace sat curled in the corner chair, a hospital blanket draped over her shoulders, her swollen eyes staring blankly at the wall. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of machines, and every single second felt like a countdown to something no parent should ever have to face. At 6:17 a.m., a nurse quietly entered and whispered that someone from the Crestwood Police Department was waiting to speak with them. Ethan gently kissed Lily's forehead and stepped outside the room, where he met Detective Riley, a tall woman in her mid-40s with a stern jawline and eyes that had seen too much. She introduced herself quickly, expressing condolences before getting straight to the point. "We've confirmed through eyewitness reports and neighborhood cameras that the vehicle involved was a red Ford Edge registered to one Margaret Benson." Ethan's fists clenched involuntarily. "Karen." Riley nodded. "Her house was empty when we arrived. No vehicle, no sign of forced entry. We believe she fled immediately after the shooting. It appears premeditated, or at least reactionary to something she'd been stewing over for a while." Ethan rubbed his temples, exhaustion mixing with rage. "She had been threatening my daughter for weeks. Over sidewalk chalk. Noise. A scooter. She called her a walking problem." Riley took notes, her expression unreadable. "We have an APB out, but there's more. Her HOA emails were subpoenaed overnight. She sent several complaints to the board about your daughter creating dangerous distractions and accused you of raising a public menace. One of the emails was written the night before the shooting." Ethan stared at her. "What did it say?" Riley hesitated. "If no one has the guts to deal with that brat and her careless parents, then maybe I will. I'm done watching my neighborhood be turned into a circus." That line didn't just sting, it ignited something. Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. She planned it. She knew exactly what she was doing. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Grace was dealing with reporters already camped outside the ER entrance. News had broken about the shooting, 7-year-old girl shot on suburban Crosswalk, was now running on every local outlet. But the headlines weren't all sympathetic. Some had twisted the story with lines like, HOA dispute turns violent, and was it a misunderstanding? One article even mentioned Karen's claim that Lily darted into the road, which police had already debunked using the crosswalk camera footage. But public opinion was already dividing. Online forums lit up with debates, some calling for Karen's immediate arrest, others echoing her sentiments about lawless kids and irresponsible parents. Ethan tried not to look, but one comment burned into his memory. Maybe if they raised their kid right, she wouldn't have been in the street. That afternoon, Grace and Ethan were visited by a woman in a gray blazer. Maya Rodriguez, a sharp, experienced civil rights attorney Grace had called from her college friend's referral. Maya got to the point fast. Karen will either be caught and charged with attempted murder, or she'll spin this into a mental health or fear-based offense. You need to be ready for both. I'll represent your family every step of the way. Ethan nodded, grateful for someone who spoke with clarity instead of pity. Maya added, but this isn't just a criminal case. It's a civil one, too. That HOA is partly responsible if they ignored or enabled her behavior. Ethan had never even thought about that. Meanwhile, the Crestwood HOA board remained silent. No statements, no apologies, not even a condolence message. It was as if they were distancing themselves from Karen as fast as possible, pretending she never existed. But Ethan knew better. Karen had friends on that board. She'd been protected for years, allowed to harass families under the guise of community regulation. And now his daughter had paid the price. That evening, as Ethan sat beside Lily once again, Detective Riley returned. We may have a lead. Karen used a debit card at a gas station about 80 miles away, Midland County. We're tracking surveillance footage now. Ethan's blood pressure rose. Then what are we waiting for? Riley held up a hand. We need to follow the legal process. But I promise you, we're on her. Grace stood behind him, her hands trembling. She won't hide forever, she whispered. She took our daughter. She doesn't get to walk away. Over the next few days, Lily remained unconscious. Brain scans showed no major trauma, but swelling around her chest made breathing difficult even with machines. Ethan read to her every day. Books about unicorns, space, and fairy tales where little girls always won in the end. Grace stayed by her bedside, every night whispering prayers, telling stories, and kissing her cheeks even when Lily didn't respond. On the fourth night, as the room sat bathed in soft blue light, Lily's fingers twitched. Ethan shot up. Grace, did you see that? They both held their breath. A minute passed. Then two. Lily's eyes fluttered open just for a moment, then closed again. But it was enough. The doctors called it a positive sign. Her recovery wouldn't be easy, but she was fighting. News of Lily's slight improvement made headlines again, this time with photos of Ethan and Grace holding her hand beside the hospital bed. Public support grew. A GoFundMe launched by a friend crossed $80,000 in 2 days. People sent cards, toys, and letters. But Karen was still missing. Then, on day 6, Detective Riley returned with a grim look. We found her car abandoned in a rural field. No prints, burned inside. But we believe she's alive. Someone saw her at a nearby motel days before. We're coordinating with marshals. Ethan felt like he was aging by the hour. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until Karen was in handcuffs. Grace began collecting every letter, every HOA notice Karen had sent over the years. She compiled audio clips from her phone, recordings of Karen yelling outside their window, confronting Lily, even making subtle threats. Maya added these to the civil case files. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute, she told the press later. This was harassment that escalated into attempted murder. And the HOA turned a blind eye. One night, Ethan walked through the neighborhood, staring at all the houses that had once felt like home. Now, everything looked darker, colder. He noticed Stan Jeffries, the current HOA president, in his front yard. Stan had always been Karen's silent supporter, a smug man who never enforced rules equally. Ethan approached him. You still standing by her, Stan? Stan looked uncomfortable. I don't know what you're talking about. Ethan didn't blink. She sent those complaints to you. You saw the threats. You did nothing. Stan shrugged. Look, we didn't think she'd actually do something like that. You know how she is, Karen talks big. She shot my daughter. And she'll go to prison for it, won't she? Stan muttered. It's not the board's fault she went off the rails. Ethan stepped closer. It is your fault. You gave her a badge. You let her patrol this neighborhood like a cop with a gun. You let her think she could get away with it. And now she has for a week. Stan stepped back nervously, saying nothing more. That interaction only fueled Ethan's rage. He returned home and wrote a public letter. He posted it to social media, accompanied by photos of Lily in the hospital. It read in part, "My daughter Lily is 7 years old. She was shot by a woman entrusted with authority in our community. She was walking in a crosswalk. We have the footage. We have the threats. If this can happen to us, it can happen to any child. And the HOA that empowered this woman is hiding behind silence. We will not be silent." The post went viral. Local protests formed outside the HOA office. Signs were raised. Justice for Lily, disband the HOA, arrest Karen now. Ethan didn't want fame. He didn't want media attention. He just wanted his daughter to smile again, to walk again, to live without nightmares. But to make that happen, Karen needed to be found and held accountable. On the 10th day, a breakthrough finally came. Karen was spotted boarding a bus under an alias in another county. She had cut and dyed her hair. She wore glasses, but a tip from a store clerk, recognizing her from the news, led to her arrest at a rest stop that evening. Ethan received the call just after midnight. "We got her," Detective Riley said simply. "She's in custody." Ethan hung up and walked into Lily's room. She was still recovering but awake now, her eyes dull with medicine but alert. He knelt beside her. "They found her, baby. The lady who hurt you. She won't hurt anyone ever again." Lily blinked slowly, her lips parting. Her voice was raspy. "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan's heart broke all over again. "No, Lily. You were perfect. She's the one who was wrong. You didn't do anything." Grace sat beside them and wept silently. Karen's arrest made national headlines. Footage showed her being escorted off the bus in handcuffs, shouting, "This is political. I feared for my life." Her attorney, Gerald Shaw, released a statement claiming she suffered from paranoia, felt threatened by the child, and mistook her movement for danger. No apology, no remorse, just excuses. Ethan watched the coverage with quiet fury. The battle wasn't over. Karen's trial was coming, and Ethan vowed to make sure the world saw her not as some fragile suburban woman with anxiety, but as the cold-blooded monster who shot a little girl in broad daylight. And now, for the first time since that horrible morning, the hunt for justice had truly begun. The courtroom was colder than Ethan imagined, not in temperature, but in spirit. Everything from the dull echo of footsteps on marble floors to the clinical hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to strip away emotion, reducing even the most horrific events into file numbers and court decorum. But Ethan wasn't there to follow etiquette. He was there to make sure the woman who tried to kill his daughter paid for it in full. Grace sat beside him on the first bench, her hand clutching his, and their attorney, Maya Rodriguez, was already flipping through color-coded files, her face unreadable but her eyes sharp with preparation. Across the room, Margaret Karen Benson sat beside her defense attorney Gerald Shaw, her face drawn and pale, though her lips were painted in a neat, defiant line. She wore an ill-fitting gray blazer, as if she were trying to appear smaller, weaker, less dangerous. But Ethan only saw the same woman who pointed a gun at his daughter and fled like a coward. The media lined the backbenches, and a few even stood outside with live mics, broadcasting what had quickly become one of the most polarizing trials in Crestwood's history. The judge, Honorable Whitmore, entered the courtroom with a stoic nod, and the room rose to its feet. "Be seated," he said, and the trial began. The prosecution opened strong. A junior district attorney named Sandra Nguyen laid out the case with precision. This is not a case of a confused woman or an accident. This is a case of a woman who used her position of perceived authority to terrorize a family, culminating in the attempted murder of a 7-year-old child. She outlined the timeline, the email threats, And the weapon Karen had used, a registered Glock 19 she'd never reported missing, even after being found. Gerald Shaw rose for the defense and painted a different picture. This case, while tragic, is not as simple as the prosecution wants you to believe. My client suffers from diagnosed anxiety and PTSD. She felt provoked, threatened, and misunderstood. Her neighborhood was plagued with chaos, and she acted on instinct. A misguided one, yes, but not malicious. Ethan felt his stomach turn. Misguided? That woman aimed and fired. Karen sat quietly, hands folded, blinking slowly at the jury as if she were the one suffering. As witnesses were called, the mood shifted. The first to take the stand was Mrs. Kaplan, the elderly neighbor who had been walking her dog the morning of the shooting. She spoke softly but clearly. I saw Margaret yell something. Then she raised her arm out the window. I thought it was a phone until I heard the bang. Could it have been anyone else? The prosecutor asked. No, Mrs. Kaplan said. It was her. I'm sure. Under cross-examination, Gerald Shaw tried to poke holes in her memory. You're 76 years old, correct? Yes. Do you wear prescription glasses? Yes. And were you wearing them that morning? Of course. Isn't it possible you mistook something else? Perhaps a sound from a passing car? I know what I saw, she replied firmly. That woman aimed at a child. The courtroom murmured. The judge silenced them with his gavel. Next came the video evidence, grainy, yes, but damning. A neighborhood security camera caught the blur of Karen's SUV veering toward the crosswalk, followed by the sound, undeniably a gunshot. Ethan could barely watch. Grace closed her eyes, but the jury watched every frame. Then came the emails. Maya and Sandra presented several messages Karen had sent to the HOA over the past year, some containing lines like, "Those people are turning this place into a zoo," and "The child is always running, shouting. She's a threat to community safety." But the most powerful piece was the final email. No one is listening. If this HOA won't fix the problem, I will. Gerald Shaw tried to claim the emails were venting, saying many people express frustration in hyperbole. Are we going to start arresting people for angry emails? He asked sarcastically. But when the prosecution brought up a deleted text recovered from Karen's cloud storage, sent to a friend the night before the shooting, reading "Tomorrow will be different. I'll finally shut them up for good," the courtroom chilled. The friend, a woman named Lynn Calder, was subpoenaed and took the stand reluctantly. She always talked about that family, Lynn admitted. It got weird. She once said kids needed discipline like in the old days. I didn't think she meant this. Then came Ethan's turn. As he stepped into the witness stand, the courtroom became silent. His voice cracked, but he never wavered. My daughter did everything right. She stopped. She waited for the signal. She looked both ways, and she crossed in front of me. I watched a woman gun her down like a deer in the street. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. She just pulled the trigger and drove off. Shaw stood slowly. Mr. Cole, were you by chance upset with the HOA prior to this incident? Ethan frowned. Everyone in the neighborhood was. But I didn't shoot a child because of it. Shaw continued. And are you aware that your daughter had previously left chalk drawings in public areas? That she rode her scooter too fast down sidewalks? Are you implying a child deserved to be shot for playing? I'm simply asking if there was a pattern of behavior. There was, Ethan interrupted, Karen's behavior. She escalated every minor thing into war. Grace testified next. Her voice was raw, but steady. My daughter had just started reading chapter books. She was afraid of thunder. She thought clouds were God's pillows. She never hurt anyone. And that woman stole part of her innocence we can never get back. One of the most shocking testimonies came from an unexpected source, Stan Jeffries, the HOA president. Under oath, and likely fearing legal blowback, Stan admitted that Karen had made several alarming statements in meetings. She called Lily a nuisance, said the Cole family was bringing down property values. She once suggested we find them every time Lily left a toy outside. The prosecution pounced. And what did the board do? We ignored it. We thought it was just her being overly strict. She'd always been like that. Do you feel responsible for what happened? Stan swallowed hard. Yes. During a break in the trial, Ethan stepped outside the courthouse to get fresh air. Protesters had gathered, holding signs: Justice for Lily, Stop HOA, Abuse, Protect Kids from Power-Hungry Neighbors. A young woman approached him with a toddler in her arms. I live in your neighborhood. Karen once yelled at me because my daughter cried too loudly. I didn't say anything. I'm so sorry. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. The pressure mounted as the trial neared closing arguments. Gerald Shaw tried to pivot hard, now leaning into the mental health angle. He called a psychiatrist who claimed Karen suffered from chronic anxiety and auditory processing disorder. She may have misinterpreted the sound of the scooter as a threat, he said. She's unstable, yes, but not evil. The prosecution struck back. Karen renewed her gun license 6 months ago. She passed a psychological screening. She planned the moment. She fled. She burned her car. She dyed her hair. That is not confusion. That is guilt. Judge Whitmore allowed both sides to present final statements. Maya Rodriguez's voice echoed through the courtroom in closing. What happened to Lily Cole is not just an accident. It is a reflection of what happens when power goes unchecked, when hatred festers behind fences and petty rules. This was not fear. It was malice. And if we do not call this evil what it is, then we fail every child in this country who dares to walk freely down their own street. Gerald Shaw's final appeal was quieter. You've heard of Karen's anxiety. You've seen the community disputes. You know this was a tragedy, but we ask that you consider the difference between a deliberate crime and a mental break. My client is not a monster. She is a broken person in a broken system. Ethan didn't hear much of that speech. His mind was only on Lily, on her laugh, her small hand in his, the moments almost taken from them forever. The jury was dismissed to deliberate. Every minute was agony. Grace gripped his hand so tightly it left marks. 2 hours passed, then 4, then 5, and finally the bailiff returned and said, "The jury has reached a verdict." The courtroom filled again. Ethan could feel his pulse in his throat. The judge nodded. Will the defendant please rise? Karen stood slowly. The foreperson looked down at the slip of paper, then up at the judge. On the charge of attempted first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Karen gasped. Her knees buckled slightly. Gerald Shaw reached out to steady her. The judge's gavel came down with authority. Sentencing will begin next week. Defendant will be held without bail until then. Ethan's breath released all at once. Grace broke down into tears. Karen was escorted out, shouting over her shoulder, "This isn't over." I was scared. I was scared. But no one believed her anymore. The courtroom didn't weep for her. It wept for Lily and what she'd endured. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed, and Ethan simply said one line into the mic. She may have pulled the trigger, but the system put the gun in her hand. That ends now. And just like that, the long path to justice neared its conclusion. But the story wasn't over, not until sentencing, and not until every thread of accountability was pulled tight. Because for Ethan and Grace, this wasn't just about a courtroom win. It was about making sure no other child would ever be hunted in their own neighborhood again. As the courtroom filled with a heavy hush, I could feel every breath in my chest like the beat of a war drum. Opposing counsel sat quietly across from me, but I could see the tension in their eyes. They had no defense, not against the mountain of evidence we had meticulously prepared. My daughter, Emily, was still recovering physically, but her spirit remained unshaken. Sitting beside my wife, Claire, in the gallery, her eyes sparkled with bravery despite the trauma she had endured. The media called it the HOA trial of the decade, but to me, this wasn't about headlines. It was about justice, about making sure that Karen Weldon, the woman who shot my child and left her for dead, would never again harm another innocent soul. Our case was airtight. We had traffic surveillance footage showing Karen aiming and firing her weapon. We had witness testimonies, medical records, forensic reports, and the crowning piece, her confession, caught on a neighbor's home security camera when she muttered, "I got the little brat," after racing back into her garage. That evidence turned the tide. Karen had tried to spin her actions as self-defense, claiming Emily was somehow threatening her safety. It was absurd, revolting even. Her lawyers leaned on every HOA technicality they could find, trying to paint my family as non-compliant troublemakers, but that story didn't hold under the weight of truth. The moment Emily took the stand, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Her tiny voice wavered but never broke. She looked right at me. Emily said, pointing at Karen, "She told me I didn't belong in her neighborhood and then shot me. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just walking home with my backpack." The jury, comprised of parents, veterans, teachers, and everyday citizens, watched in silent heartbreak as Emily recounted the pain, the terror, and the betrayal. Karen, still wearing her arrogant smirk, dared to roll her eyes. That was her final mistake. I made my closing arguments with every ounce of truth I had lived through. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this isn't just about HOA bylaws or power gone unchecked. This is about a woman who believed she could shoot a child and escape justice because she held authority in a neighborhood. My daughter was seven, and Karen Weldon tried to erase her life because she felt inconvenienced by our presence. We will not stand for that. Not as parents, not as neighbors, not as Americans. The jury didn't even need a full hour to return their verdict, guilty on all counts. Karen's composure cracked for the first time since her arrest. Her shriek echoed in the courtroom as the judge sentenced her to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Her HOA title stripped, her home seized for damages, and her reputation obliterated. But even that didn't feel like enough. I wanted more than prison, I wanted change. And that's what I fought for next. With the trial behind us, I pushed for legislation named after my daughter, Emily's Law, a sweeping measure that barred HOA board members from exercising unchecked authority without psychological evaluations, background checks, and neighborhood-wide elections. Within a year, Emily's Law was ratified across multiple states. National news covered it. Emily even got a letter from the president commending her courage. She beamed with pride as she read it aloud at her school assembly. But while the world celebrated justice, our family still bore the scars. Emily had to undergo multiple surgeries and countless therapy sessions. Some nights, she still woke up screaming. Claire and I never left her side. We became each other's anchors, reminders of strength, and symbols of survival. The HOA where it all started dissolved. After Karen's conviction, neighbors voted to disband the board entirely. New leadership rose, grounded in compassion rather than control. As for Karen, she vanished into the prison system, no longer a threat, no longer a tyrant disguised as a neighbor. 1 year after the shooting, we stood together at the newly rebuilt Crosswalk, now renamed Emily's Path. A bronze plaque with her name and the words "She walked with courage" stood proudly where blood once stained the concrete. Emily held my hand and whispered, "Daddy, I'm not scared anymore." That was the moment it truly ended. That was the moment justice didn't just punish, it healed. Our story became a beacon for others who had been silenced or intimidated by power-hungry HOA members. And every time a parent stood up, every time a voice rang out against injustice, I remembered my daughter's small voice on that witness stand. She didn't just survive, she changed the world.